Now, the second update. This is concerning, once again, Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic of South Africa, where I reside and where I'm from, of course. And this time he was implicated into or by the former, or maybe still sitting, I don't know how we actually distinguish him at this point, but he's certainly outgoing in some capacity. And the police minister in this regard is Senzo Mchunu. So Senzo Mchunu actually was the one who implicated the president by actually saying that he consulted the president when the political killings or the probes into the political killings was actually had an investigative unit that was dedicated to just investigating those particular issues with assassinated politicians. You have it. And it was disbanded, and the president seemed to have signed off on it and just pretty much give the whole nod to it and say, all right, cool, that he's disbanded that and he's happy, and nothing was done from that capacity. Now, it does make Cyril Ramaphosa look bad in this regard, because now he'll have to defend and actually state that it was something that did actually happen or did not happen, and he has to now state that, yes, this is, or has to refute it some way, that he either has to say this is a complete fabrication or a lie, or he's going to have to back himself up and actually state that, no, listen, this unit was actually disbanded under Senzo Mchunu's sort of oversight, or his actual, while he was directing the affairs of the police ministry. But effectively, him as the president could have overridden any sort of decision in that regard. And by his inaction, or him just remaining particularly, I don't know, aloof, I should say, away from this whole disbanding of this particular unit into political killings, he will then have to give a statement and clarify whatever sort of was pretty much stated there in the political committee. Now, the funny thing is that Senzo himself, as in Mr. Mchunu, in this regard, actually he stated this orally when he was cross-examined by the members of parliament, but apparently it was not on his statement. So, meaning that on the filing affidavits and all of those statements in the paperwork, none of it included that conversation with the president. So I do believe that this is something that could be quite easily refutable by Cyril Ramaphosa in this regard. However, he's now painted him into a corner where he'll now speak. Now, what does this all have to do with this? Because if you know, I'm in the whole ministry and what God actually gives in terms of proclamations and everything. And what I stated there was the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa will be able to prove that the police in this regard are compromised. So I don't know if this whole explosive or potentially explosive, him having to take the stand or having to now testify and actually just helping this probe and this whole situation, will it now give him the opportunity to actually prove that point and explain that he has the information, he knows how deep this whole payroll and know which police are actually getting kickbacks. Let's just put it that way. So that is the one thing I'm very privy to. And I wouldn't say this if I didn't know for certain and didn't have it as material fact. That's something that I have seen for myself. And it's not exactly out in the public domain as to how it all correlates together. But he'll be able to give somewhat of a cohesive, perhaps, argument or compelling sort of evidence in this regard, that he'll be able to dig that out and having to prove his point, and especially where it leads to in that particular situation, which is about the arrest of the former president, whom he was actually serving with as the vice president, as Cyril Ramaphosa at the time. And I'm talking about Jacob Zuma. Now, Jacob Zuma himself has been stated and has been taken to court concerning the paying back of the money that was used for defending all these cases that he caught. Now, I didn't peruse the details of that and and everything, as far as in particular to which actual the actual court cases or which one, because he caught quite a few. So I'm not too privy to that, but essentially it's just about the legal team and the legal fees that happened, and that was actually supposed to be paid back to the state. And that is why we're seeing what's going on with Jacob Zuma now having this hot seat in this regard. And he will get arrested, if you remember when I spoke about this whole prophecy and everything. And even when I started the show, I spoke about the fact that we're in spring. And yet this cold weather sort of just always found a way to just come back. And this is something that God was just showing me, that when the rains pretty much just hit, and this is to drive up the whole demand for electricity and the load shedding. And this is just a result of that. To keep the lights on, President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to have to start digging into the reserves and start with these probes just to keep the lights on and to keep Eskom running. So this is where we are right now in the prophetic timeline, and exactly what we are seeing. And it is important for me to keep on saying this because I do have a weekly podcast, fortunately, and I don't mind repeating it because there's always new people coming in. The advantages of having a small channel, a small platform, is that you treat everything as new. And as it comes, there's always a case of how to correlate the current developments to exactly what God had already decreed to me and actually showed, and had already sort of just communicated, quite, I will say, unilaterally stated, as far as Jacob Zuma being the high profile case that is happening. But what's going to lead to his arrest? Not so much about what happens in this court case. I think this is just the teaser. What I saw was the State Investigative Unit, which is the SIU, going to be going into Nkandla, which is the former president's sort of his residence and his place of residence and his home village. And when they start going over there, that's when you'll know that, hang on, we've got a situation on our hands, and it's going to lead to the former president now being arrested and being detained once again. And this is where it gets a little scary, because if you remember what happened the last time he was actually taken into custody and actually he was detained for a little while, and that was the whole situation that broke out with the looting. So the shops being broken into and the malls being raided by, I don't know, it's just like civilians or random civilians just coming out. And with the unemployment having surged and actually gone up since 2021, and remember 2021, we're still pretty much experiencing the last days of the pandemic and the lockdowns, and people just got out in their droves and all of that. And we saw then that even companies were closing down, and especially that I have a friend who was a lawyer and in the country at the time, and he was saying that he had never seen so many companies filing for bankruptcy or having to liquidate as he had seen at the time while you're still in the country. But essentially, what we're going to see now, and I've pretty much just prefaced this about the fact that now that we've seen Walmart come into our market, meaning that there's going to be quite synonymous meaning with the company and the holding company here in South Africa's own Walmart is actually called Massmart. And once Walmart comes in and then has to leave the country, that's when you will see the outgoing of Massmart also sort of interrelating with the fact that the mass job losses are going to come with Massmart's exit. So let me say that again. So Massmart, aka Walmart in South Africa, once they also are going, that is going to mean that the actual precipice of joblessness in this country is going to hit that pinnacle at that point. So we have to, of course, just brace ourselves, because this is what's going to lead to, with the people now being unemployed and being quite desperate. They're going to be hitting the streets, and we're going to be seeing things like, of course, in tandem with the service delivery issues that we have with the whole, like I was already explained, that Eskom is already kind of struggling keeping the lights on, hence why the current corruption probes that we have right now. And then the water cuts with something that's also come in, and that's even more critical than what happens with the electricity. So we're going to see all of that coming into the fore. But of course, there's something else that people also need to quite be looking quite into right now, especially when you look at the state of the universities, and that is with NSFAS, which is the actual body that deals with paying off tuition fees for those that are previously disadvantaged or cannot afford to go university. And apparently NSFAS right now looks like they're actually going to be closing down. So there are going to be a lot of people who will not be able to complete their studies and everything heading into the new academic year, which starts officially in February, but of course the registrations and everything has to happen around January. So we've now reached the fourth quarter of the year. We have to now pretty much have to just be mindful of the fact that there are going to be protests again, and this time is going to be more widespread, and it's not going to be have that that whole convenience or that whole luxury of just being able to have simmered down and be negotiated in a way that it seems like it means a late registration. I think there's going to be quite no registration at this point. So it's looking quite bleak in that regard. And it's just one little factor that is something that is I've been privy to and something that I know of. But there is more to this NSFAS thing that I've also seen, that of course there is things like academic fraud that are something I've been quite exposed to. You know, I'm not going to get quite into that this matter because I don't want to drag this on. But with what we're seeing with Cyril Ramaphosa doing all these probes, that you're going to be seeing certain things that are going to be coming out. And this is something that means that it's going to be quite far-reaching, because as the current government is looking to keep the lights on at Eskom, they're going to have to be digging into so many reserves, and people are just going to have to be implicated and going to have to look into this matter. And like I just explained about the whole fraud that happens even in academia, that is something that is going to be quite significant in this particular point in time. But that's going to work in tandem, like I explained, with the student demonstrations, particularly that they won't be able to attend and complete their studies, or even attend their studies, and some will be unfortunately just left stranded, just as that, simple as that. Anyway, I guess without saying too much and without repeating too much, I'm just going to have to leave this as the last update for the week, and then I'll be back with the main segment of the show.